You're listening to episode 173 of the Master Your Mind, Business, and Life podcast. I'm sure many of the listeners in the States today expected a Thanksgiving episode, and while I hate to disappoint, this episode was a long time coming. Remember back in October when I shared an episode about doubt versus belief, that I had some things to share, but I couldn't exactly share them? If you didn't catch that episode or just don't remember, let me give you a little refresher. So within that episode, I shared that I had an episode planned with Sherelle Turner, but I couldn't drop it. And then I shared that I was going to do an episode on Imposter Syndrome, this episode, but I couldn't release that one either. I couldn't tell you why, though. I kind of just left you hanging, but today, my friends, I am sharing the big why behind it all, and I'm also sharing a recent experience with Imposter Syndrome. While you're listening today, take a screenshot, post it on Instagram, tag me in it, at MindBizLife, and I'll reshare with the community. Of course, I also always love your 5-star ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts or similar. When you drop a rating and review, it actually aids the algorithm and it helps get the show into the top charts, which then means more people around the world get access to life mastery tools, tips, and wisdom. All right, are you ready to dive into this episode? You know what to do. Tune in, turn it up, let's go.
You're listening to Master Your Mind, Business and Life. Conversations with everyday world shifters, truth seekers, and rule breakers. Here's your host, Lauren Smith.
I have to share an entire backstory with this because you all know, well, if you don't know by now, you're about to know. I'm super woo. You know, the more I embrace it, the more I just feel like my true self. So I am super woo, and I have to share this story because, well, there's always a story, right? So back in April of this year, 2020, I had a medium reading done, and we were channeling one of my guiding lights. And within this reading, a very detailed event was laid out. It involved me and my mentor, Sherelle, and we were speaking at an event. It was described to be a bit like Mind Valley. Everything would be spiritual, mindfulness, uplifting. It was described as a wholesome crowd, and people were there to learn. But there were thousands of people. I was also told that I wouldn't have to do anything for this event, that they would come and collect us, and that me and my mentor, Sherelle, must do it together. Now, I'm sure you can imagine my confusion during this reading. Not only were we still in lockdown mode, but I couldn't even fathom how in COVID-plagued 2020, we would be doing any type of speaking event with thousands of people. In my August reading, the same event was reiterated, but this time a little bit more detail was given, but still the same premise. The timing was given to us and it said December. So I really thought that I would be waiting until December for this to kind of, I don't know, lay itself out or, come and collect me, right? So then comes September and it all just starts happening. I was asked to be part of a live podcasting event called Podcast Wellness Week, hosted by Podbean. This is an entire week dedicated to wellness with live shows featuring many of our favorite podcasters, daily meditations, wellness hacks, special episode releases. Oh my goodness, and so much more. That was a lot. But as I was approached to be part of this, I had agreed to be part of a panel. And I thought nothing more of it in that moment. It was just like, okay, yeah, I'll be part of this panel. Didn't really even think about how big this was, right? So in October, I was reapproached with some more details of the event, and I was asked to not only be the moderator of my panel, but to also interview a headliner. And at the time, we had no idea who these headliners would be. They also asked me to submit a special podcast episode that they could release. They then, here's the kicker, told me that they have a reach of over 1 million people on their app. No big deal, right? So, of course, this is where my reading begins to make sense. My stage wouldn't be a physical stage, it was a virtual stage. The thousands of people wouldn't be in person, they would be in their homes engaging from their devices. And that special episode, Of course, it had to be done with Shereel, my mentor and friend, who has been instrumental in my emotional and spiritual growth and is a large reason that I'm talking to you right now today. And when my reading said they would come and collect us, well, I got collected all right. There was nothing I did different between April and September. I simply kept going. Now, here is where the imposter syndrome kicks in. If you're not familiar with the term imposter syndrome, you're likely more familiar with the feelings that it brings forth, the feelings of self-doubt around your skills, talents, accomplishments, and even your worth. When I was asked to lead my panel, I was like, cool. And when I was asked to interview a headliner, I thought, dope. Neither of those things really intimidated or scared me or even made me nervous. Why? Because I've been flexing and working out my podcast muscle for 2.5 years. Showing up for conversations no longer gets me nervous. In fact, I feel like I am in a state of flow during these conversations. But it was something about that audience of 1 million that got me. Now, on November 7th, 2008, on a new moon, I set the intention that I would reach 1 million people through my podcast. That seemed like a massive undertaking at the time because the podcast had, no joke, probably like 700 downloads in total at that time. I mean, it was only a month or two old. Not a big audience, right? When I reread the goal I had made back in 2018, I realized that this event makes that goal come true. I didn't specifically state that my podcast would have to have 1 million downloads. I stated that I wanted to reach 1 million people through it. I really released that goal, meaning it was a goal, but I wasn't waking up every day thinking about 1 million downloads or 1 million people in reach. Instead, I kept showing up for the podcast, holding the space, putting in the work to get me there. 1 million seemed like a far off reality of people to impact until it wasn't. The 1 million was surely my holy shit moment. One night before bed, I found myself deep in my thoughts and I was greeted by thoughts that I had worked so hard to overcome in the past. Thoughts like, you are not worthy of this. You didn't do anything to earn this. No one wants to hear from you. You've never hosted more than 2 guests on your show at once. What makes you think you can host more than 2? Do you even know how to moderate a conversation on a panel with so many various experts? What have you done that makes you an expert? What do you have to offer? The other women on your panel have an audience of over 100,000. Your numbers are laughable in comparison to theirs. Those are the thoughts and the feelings I went to sleep with that night. But when I woke up the next morning, I decided I was going to write out all of those negative thoughts, mostly to get them out of my head. I have a tendency of writing things down to get them out of my head because sometimes when I see the stories I've been telling myself, I'm more easily able to identify my own BS. The fact is, I am worthy of this. I did a lot to earn this, and I can say I'm an expert. I've hosted a weekly show nonstop for over 2 years. That's 120 weeks straight without missing a single week. I've hosted and produced and published 175 episodes. I've spoken to over 100 experts. I've worked my dang tail off. The whole part about no one wants to hear from you is so laughable. I know this because I have thousands of listeners who listen to this show, who show up and endlessly support me on this mission, simply by tuning in and turning up. And when I examined the story, I was telling myself that the other women on my panel have larger numbers and somehow that makes them more worthy than me. I simply took a moment to mindfully lift each one of them up in praise and gratitude, praising them for their hard work that they've put in, not only to their podcast, but into their brands, their mission, into their lives, and gratitude for them for agreeing to be part of this event and to be in the same space as me, and gratitude for them for paving the way for many and shifting the lives of hundreds of thousands. Gratitude that they didn't give up on themselves, because they remind me not to give up on myself either. It's said that for every negative thought, you need 3 positive thoughts to counterbalance it. So I journaled out more positive beliefs about myself and my abilities that day, which superseded my list of doubts. Imposter syndrome shows up at various times in various ways, but there are 3 things that I like to do when I recognize these feelings coming on. The first I just laid out for you. It's to separate your feelings from the facts. I do this by writing down my fears, aka my feelings, and then I follow them up with facts. The second is to visualize your success. I have spent many days over the past few weeks simply visualizing how smooth this is all going to run. I visualize myself rocking the conversation. I visualize myself having the words flowing through me with ease. I visualize how I'll be smiling while talking. My visualizations always have emotion attached to them because then I'm able to feel it throughout my body. That makes it more real of an experience, right? And lastly, reward yourself. Now, this is an in-between step that comes up with those feelings and facts step because learning to pat yourself on the back is a huge thing to do. I am my biggest cheerleader most days. I'd say that my mama is number 2, but I can always give myself a clap because I have to be happy with my work, my results, and of course, myself. But you can also guarantee that I will be rewarding myself, or rather celebrating myself after Podcast Wellness Week is over. I may have a special family dinner, or I may treat myself to something that I've wanted for a while. Who knows? I'll know when the time comes, but I'm rewarding myself for a job well done because I've earned this. Courage comes from taking risks. Building up that courage is like strengthening the muscle. The more you work out, the stronger you become. The more risks you take, the more bold and confident you become. I hope you'll join me for Podcast Wellness Week through the Podbean podcast app. This event is from November 30th to December 4th. It features daily panels covering different topics for each day, including mental health, sleep, yoga and meditation, healing and positive mindset, physical body, and the body. Plus, there's daily meditation, special episodes, and headliner interviews. It is free of charge, and all you need is the Podbean app, but you can upgrade your attendance for $25, and you'll be able to play back your favorite panels and interviews. I will be interviewing headliner, speaker, therapist, and author, and YouTube sensation Katie Morton. We'll be discussing building and maintaining a healthy mind and healthy body. You can catch this live, live on Monday, November 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And I'll be leading the Body Love panel live on Thursday, December 3rd at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Joining me for this conversation is best-selling author and blogger Stacey Toth of the Whole View podcast, intuitive eating counselor and co-founder of the Body Love Society and the How to Love Your Body podcast, Jenna Free, and certified international health coach, Kayla Nesda of the Wellness Glow Up podcast. Together, we'll dive into the relationships we have with our physical bodies, how society at large shapes our self-image, and how we can learn to love ourselves even more. I'm also dropping an episode 2 weeks early, specifically for Podcast Wellness Week, and it will only be available on the Podbean app. The episode is titled Let Go of Control, How to Surrender and Release with Sherrill Turner. You'll be able to listen to this episode again on the app during Podcast Wellness Week, and then I'll reshare that same episode back here on my channel on December 16th. I know that was a lot of information that I just hit you with, but not to worry. I've linked all of these details on this week's episode notes found on mindbizlife.com. The stories we tell ourselves are as fundamentally critical as the stories we share with others. When you're faced with imposter syndrome, examine how you can rewrite the story you're telling yourself. Acknowledge your strengths, your power, stand in your worth, take a leap, and dare to be. I hope to see you next week live during Podcast Wellness Week. I'm also back on Friday for another episode of Fuel Your Life Friday, but until then, remember, every level of life is an opportunity to grow. Be well, my friend.